Bruce Lee had taken exactly 2 steps onto the stage when the kick came at his head, and he had not even reached the chair yet. The audience did not have time to gasp. The host, half risen behind his desk with a welcome still in his mouth, did not have time to finish the sentence. There was a man walking out to shake hands, and then there was a size 14 shoe traveling toward his temple at the speed of a professional who meant it, and between those 2 things there was no gap at all. To understand how a friendly late-night booking turned into the 2 seconds the network spent the next week deciding what to do with, you have to go back about 40 minutes, to before Bruce ever came out, to the segment the big man in the grey suit had already been having with 11 million people, and to what he'd spent all of it saying. His name was Anders Vold. He was 6'5", and he had come out of the Northern European full-contact circuit with a record that was genuinely frightening. Heavyweight kickboxing champion 2 years running, a background in competitive swimming that had built him into something that did not look like a fighter until it moved, and then looked like nothing else. He was by every honest measure the real thing, not a showman, not a fraud, an actual elite combat athlete who had knocked out actual elite men, and he had come to America with the ambition of breaking into the movies and a specific theory about how to do it. The theory was this: you make a name by taking one down. Vold had decided the fastest way up was to expose the thing the film business was built on. All these movie fighters, these choreographed heroes, none of them, he believed, had ever been in a real exchange with a real fighter, and if you could show that on camera in front of enough people, you would not be a newcomer anymore. You would be the man who proved it. He'd been saying versions of this for weeks in gyms and to reporters, and the bookers had heard about it and done the thing bookers do, which was to see ratings in it. If you want to know why the host agreed to put a man like that on the same stage as Bruce Lee, stay with this, because he almost didn't. And the reason he did is the reason it went as far as it went. The host was one of the great ones, a man who'd run late-night television for the better part of 2 decades on charm and timing, and an instinct for exactly how much danger made good television and how much made a lawsuit. When his producers pitched the big European champion, he'd been wary. Then they told him who else was booked that night, and he made a decision he would revisit for the rest of his life. He thought the contrast would be electric, and he thought nothing would actually happen, because nothing ever did. Guests behaved. That was the deal. The lights came up and everyone remembered they were on television. So Vold came out first, and he was good on camera. That was the thing nobody had expected. He was funny in a dry northern way, and he was handsome, and he did a short demonstration that put the whole studio on its feet, a jumping kick that cracked a board held 2 feet over his own head. The audience loved him, and riding that love, warm and certain, he began to talk. He said he respected tradition. He said the martial arts the American public worshipped were a beautiful lie, that the men in the movies had never been touched by anyone who was really trying, and that speed on film was a trick of the camera and nothing more. And the host, sensing the edge, asked him lightly whether he'd say that to a particular guest's face, and Vold smiled into the camera and said he was very much hoping to. Bruce had been backstage for all of it. He'd watched it on the monitor in the green room, the sound low, a cup of tea going cold beside him, and he had not said anything to the 2 nervous producers hovering near the door. He'd watched the board break. He'd watched the man's hips when he threw the kick, the way you watch a thing you're taking apart in your head. And when the stage manager came to bring him out, he'd stood and straightened his jacket and said only one thing, quietly, which the stage manager repeated for years afterward. He'd said he already threw the first one, in his mind. Then he'd walked out to the curtain. The host announced him, warm and huge, and the band played, and Bruce Lee stepped through the curtain into the lights, and the audience came up roaring, and Anders Vold rose from the guest chair and turned and did not extend his hand. He'd planned it. That was the thing the slow motion of memory made clear to everyone afterward. This was not temper, it was strategy. He had decided, somewhere in those 40 minutes, that the way to become the man who exposed the movie fighter was to catch him cold in the open, in the first unguarded second, before the choreography could save him, to land one clean kick on Bruce Lee's head on live television and own the moment forever. And Bruce had taken 2 steps toward the chairs, smiling, lifting a hand toward the host, when Vold pivoted off his back foot and sent a side kick full speed, full intention, a real one, straight at the side of Bruce Lee's head. Here is what worth staying for, because it is the part that 11 million people saw and could not believe they'd seen. Bruce did not lean back. Leaning back is what you do when a kick surprises you, and this kick did not surprise him because he had watched the man's hips do exactly this to a board 40 minutes earlier, and some part of him had been ready since the curtain. There is a tell in a side kick, the chamber, the half-beat where the knee draws up before the leg fires, and most men never see it because by the time they see it, the foot is already there. Bruce had seen it from the green room monitor. He saw it again now from 2 feet away, and he was already moving before the leg extended. He dropped, not away from the kick, but under it and inside it, his knees folding just enough that the size 14 shoe passed over the top of his head, close enough to move his hair, and the whole enormous committed length of Vold's leg went through the space where a skull had been 1/3 of a second before, and found nothing but studio air. And a kick that finds nothing is a catastrophe for the man who threw it, because all of that speed and all of that mass are now committed to a direction with no target to stop them. Vold was, for one instant, a 6'5" champion balanced on one foot with the other leg fully extended over empty space, and every ounce of his weight traveling somewhere he had not planned to send it. And Bruce was already inside, already up out of the drop, already there, and he did the one thing that turned a miss into an ending. He did not strike. He caught the extended leg at the ankle with one hand, guided it a few inches further in exactly the direction it was already going, and with his other hand touched Vold's chest, barely, a palm placed flat against the sternum with almost no force in it at all. He didn't need force. Vold's own kick had already taken his balance. The palm just told it where to fall. The champion went down, not thrown poured, the way water goes over an edge, his own tremendous momentum carrying him off his single planted foot, and down onto the studio floor, between the chairs, flat on his back, the wind leaving him in a sound, the front microphones caught. The whole thing, from the pivot to the floor, had taken about 2 seconds. And Bruce was standing over him, exactly where he'd been standing, jacket barely disturbed, not breathing hard, having thrown not a single strike, having only, precisely, let a man's own attack finish itself. The studio made no sound at all. It is a specific silence, the one a live audience makes when it has stopped being entertained and started being frightened, and 200 people dropped into it at once. A woman in the 3rd row had both hands pressed over her mouth. A man near the aisle had come halfway out of his seat and frozen there. In the control booth, later accounts agreed, nobody said a word for the length of the whole thing, because there was no procedure for what they were watching, and no one wanted to be the first to name it. And into that silence the host came up out of his chair for real, both hands raised, and did the thing that gave the moment its name. He did not cut to commercial. He said loud into his own live microphone, "That's enough, we're stopping. That is enough." And the whole show stopped on his word, 11 million people watching a host stand at his desk with both hands in the air over a champion flat on the floor, and a small man standing quietly above him. If you want to know what Bruce did next, because it was not what the room expected, stay with this. He crouched, fast, down beside the man who had just tried to kick his head off on national television, and he put a hand on Vold's shoulder to keep him from surging up too fast, the way you steady a man who's had the breath knocked out of him, and he said something low that only the 2 of them and the boom operator ever heard. Then he stood and he put his hand down, an actual hand, offered to help 6'5" off the floor. And the audience watched the man who'd been kicked help up the man who'd kicked him, and something in the room began slowly to turn. Vold took the hand. That surprised people later, when they told it. But the ones who understood fighting were not surprised at all, because a real champion knows in his own body the difference between a man who beat him and a man who could have hurt him and chose not to. And Vold had felt exactly how little force had been in that palm against his chest, and he knew precisely what it meant. He got to his feet. He was not hurt. That was the whole point. There was no mark on him, nothing bruised but the thing he'd walked out there so certain of. and he stood in front of 11 million people, not knowing where to put his eyes. The host got the show back. He was a professional. He talked the room down, made one gentle joke that let the audience breathe, and guided the two of them into the chairs that had been meant for a friendly conversation 40 minutes and one lifetime ago. And what happened in those chairs is the part the newspapers led with the next morning, because it was stranger and better than the kick. Vold, still catching his breath, said into his microphone that he had come onto this stage to prove something, and that he had proved it, only it was the opposite of what he'd meant to prove. He said he had believed film fighters had never been touched by a real one. He looked at Bruce and he said, "I am a real one, and he did not touch me." He said it the way a man says a true thing that costs him, and the cost was what made the audience believe it. Bruce did not gloat, and he did not wave it away either. He said Vold was genuinely one of the fastest men he had ever stood across from, and that he meant it, and that the kick had been real and well thrown and would have taken the head off almost anyone. Then he said the thing that the young champion carried out of that studio, and by every later account, into the whole rest of his career. He said you threw everything you had, and it was very good, and it was not enough, and now you know exactly where the top of the mountain is. Most men never get to find out. He said that is not a defeat, that is a map. They cut nothing in the end. The host had thought about it. The network lawyers were in the booth before the credits rolled, but the thing had gone out live to the entire eastern half of the country, and you cannot unbroadcast 2 seconds that 11 million people have already seen, and the tape of a champion getting up off the floor and telling the truth into a microphone turned out to be the best thing the show had aired in a year. They ran it. It became for a while the most talked about 90 seconds on American television. Anders Vold got his movies, not because he beat anyone, because 11 million people had watched him lose with more dignity than most men win with, and it turned out that was worth more than the win he'd come for. He worked for decades. And late in his life, when an interviewer asked him about the moment that made his career, everyone expected him to name a film, and instead he told the story of a night when he was young and certain, and threw a real kick at a man's head on live television and was on his back before he understood he'd missed. The interviewer asked what the man had whispered, down on the floor, in the second before the hand came to help him up. And Vold was quiet for a while, and then he said, "He told me that the fastest way to learn was to attack someone better than you, and that I'd just done it, and that I should be proud." He said I'd tried to end his career, and he congratulated me on my education. And then Vold laughed, the big easy laugh of a man long past the shame of it, and said that was the day he stopped wanting to beat people and started wanting to be that.